Greetings, everyone. We are back at the Sharpen Up Podcast. I'm JC Bruce, your host, along with my co-host, Ron Rollins. I'm broadcasting from Florida. He's in Ohio. And we're talking about the merry month of May. This is actually part two of a two-part podcast. And I think the last time we left off, we were talking about, among other things, who has the best cheeseburger, right, Ron?
That's right, because I believe the amazing and always inspirational Sharpen Up newsletter reminds fans and readers that May is National Hamburger Month for some weird reason. After we talked about your poll, you mentioned your newsletter. The Sharpen Up newsletter has its first ever reader poll, and you asked who makes the best hamburger, and you name a couple of big chains and small national chains, including one in Longview, Texas called Juicy's I'd never heard of. But we did say that somehow I was going to experience Juicy's at some point. And I want to say that I enjoyed our chat about hamburgers so much that I went to a local joint afterwards and treated myself to a burger at Sliders, which is a place up in East Dayton that I like. And in the men's room, before I left, they had a sign over the sink that said, a quote from Calvin Trillin, who I do not quote very often, but I will say, Calvin Trillin apparently said, anyone who doesn't think the best hamburger joint in the world is located in their town is a sissy.
A sissy.
Sissy.
Not just mistaken.
Right. Not a dumbass, not a fool, not an idiot, not a numbskull, not a tasteless hack. A sissy.
But a sissy. a sissy because you're afraid to defend your town in the
interest of pugilistic hamburger defense.
Right. Yeah. Right. In the violent world of the hamburger debate.
Right.
If you're not willing to stand up for your burger joint, what kind of place are you anyway?
Right. So anyway, here's to my friends at Sliders. Not to be confused with it's with a slider with a Y. Not to be confused with the White Castle slider. Right.
Right.
Anyway.
Right.
But anyway. Oh, also in keeping with last podcast scripted theme, I have the instead of my Bigfoot mug, I have my Mothman search team coffee mug today.
Right. So. And for those who are listening to this in the traditional audio format, you won't have seen Ron putting up his Mothman cup. But for those of you who are seeing this on video, you saw it here first. There is an actual Mothman coffee cup available to you if you go to the, what is it, a Mothman gift store?
It's the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Right.
Point Pleasant, West Virginia.
Yeah, it's worth the $4 admission. Yeah, it'll only take you about 20 minutes to go, maybe only 2 minutes to go through it. Right.
Well, since yesterday we were talking about, mythical creatures like Bigfoot and Sasquatch and then real creatures like the skunk ape. So Mothman is like one of those kind of things. Yes. Only Mothman's real too, right?
Mothman is very real. Yes. Richard Gere made a movie about him, so that's how you know he has credibility.
Richard Gere made a movie about Mothman.
The Mothman prophecies from the late 90s, mid 90s or something like that. There's actually some props and costumes from the movie in the museum. Yeah.
Holy cow.
It's possible that was the movie that marked the beginning of the end for Richard Gere's not terribly long career. That's not fair. That's not fair. Richard Gere is still around, but at the height of his career may have peaked with the Mothman prophecies. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, now I'm going to have to see it.
Yeah, It's pretty bad. It's really bad. But meanwhile, what else is happening in May?
Well, in May, we have a lot going on. I actually have a list here. I'm going to read from it. Just a few things, not the entire list. This list comes from the Sharpen Up newsletter that Ron mentioned. It's a monthly newsletter that goes out to subscribers. It's also posted on social media and on my website. And you can subscribe for free at www.jcbruce.com. That's my website. Log on. You'll see where to subscribe. Yeah, we do not share anyone's email addresses with anybody except trusted advertisers who will pester the hell out of you night and day. That isn't
Right.
true. We don't share it with anybody.
Not even aggressive Russian trolls.
No, not even aggressive. I don't actually even share it with Ron because,
That's
who
true.
knows what he would do with this information,
That's true.
right? So no,
That's true.
it comes in, it goes into a vault and into a lockbox. It actually goes right with the Social Security lockbox. They're right next to one another, and it's perfectly safe.
Excellent.
But anyway, in the month of May, let's just see here. There are some first of all, let me just back up for a second. Every month is chock-a-block full of holidays and celebrations. Most of them have been, have commercial purposes. And we're going to go back and talk about Mother's Day, because Mother's Day did not originate as a commercial exploitive holiday. It actually has its roots in the Civil War, and it's the big event in the month of May. But it actually has very touching history. But of course, then it got immediately turned into an exploitive event to sell candy and greeting cards.
Well, it is America. Come on, Jeff. This is America. Come on.
Right. It's capitalism at work. So anyway, things to know in the month of May. This isn't all of them. I'll just curate this a little bit. One of the things you got to know is that the Kentucky Derby is in May, on May 7th. So if you haven't got your tickets yet, get on down to Churchill Downs. You can see the Kentucky Derby on May 7th.
And
May
we
4th
went to Churchill Downs a few years ago, remember?
Yeah, we did.
We did. We had a friend gave us some tickets. It wasn't for the Derby, but just a regular Saturday. We had a blast.
It was a beautiful place.
It's a really cool place. Yeah.
May 4th is Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you.
Indeed.
We all get that wonderful pun. Here's something to put on your calendar, a real actual thing to put on your calendar. May 16th, there's going to be a lunar eclipse. So you can go outside and you can see the Earth's shadow covering them. And there's only 2 this year. And there are no solar eclipses to be viewed in North America. So this is a great astronomical event.
Always fun.
May 6th is National No Pants Day. Don't ask me why. Yeah.
Does that include underwear or just all pants?
Well, see, I think this is just pants, because on June 22nd is No Panty Day. So they're distinct events.
So if you wanted to go commando on one of those days, just to be in the spirit of it, it would be the Panty Day, probably.
Probably. Yeah, I would guess.
I may go commando both days just to have May covered then.
That way you would, be certain to, not have missed out on anything. Right.
Thank you. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. May 3rd is Lumpy Rug Day. That's the day you hide stuff under the rug that you don't want anybody to know about.
You're not supposed to actually fix the lumps that day?
No. This is the day you can hide everything under a rug.
I misunderstood that one.
Right. Here's an important date. May 23rd this isn't just a national holiday. This is a worldwide holiday. It's International World Turtle Day. Now, as everyone should know, the Earth is flat, and it rests on the back of 3 elephants, which in turn are standing on the back of a giant space turtle.
Correct.
But that's not what this holiday is about. This holiday is about turtle rescues. So this is for rescuing turtles.
In fact, that was something I ended up speaking about with over the weekend. My brother-in-law, who lives in Fernandina Beach, about 3 hours from you, well, 3.5 maybe, up near Jacksonville, retired along with my sister onto a boat. Says in Fernandina Beach, in Florida, they have tons of sea turtles. Apparently there's a part of the beach is a preserve, I guess, and that there's signs all over the town, like for turtle crossings. He says people will actually stop their cars and hold off traffic so that the turtles can
go through.
Yeah, which I think is really cool.
We have
it made me very happy.
We have sea turtles here too, and people go out there and they block off the nest. So they put stakes around it and, basically caution tape around it so people leave the nest alone. And it is. It's really cool. It's really cool.
I like that.
Okay, we can talk about Mother's Day.
All right. Mine is now gone to the Great Mother's place in the sky, and I miss her every day.
So is
But
mine.
yeah, I mean, Mother's Day is a big deal.
Yeah,
Yeah, you said it had civil.
my mom
You
lived to
said it
be
had civil
98
Civil
years
War.
old. So
Oh, let's see. Mine would be 84, I think. That yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, but yeah,
So of
great
course
great
I'm
lady.
hoping and praying that I picked up most of her genes so that
Yeah, really.
uh,
Uh,
but
Tell us about the Civil War roots. You mentioned early on the
yeah,
past
okay. So
Civil War roots to it.
here's an interesting thing. One of the things I do when I write the newsletter is I go through the calendar and see, okay, what's going on. And then I do a little research using the Never Wrong Internet as my
Right,
primary source.
right.
And it turns out that the first Mother's Day, the first actual celebration of Mother's Day,
Hmm.
occurred in the year 1907. And it was a woman named Anna Jarvis who did a church service in Grafton, West Virginia. West Virginia, once again, makes its way into our podcast.
It does.
Mothman and the home of Mother's Day. And so she did this because she was inspired by her own mom, who during the Civil War spent a lot of time tending to the wounded of both soldiers from both the North and the South.
Huh.
And she and another woman who earned fame in her own right, Julia Ward Howe.
Mm.
And their idea was that they would create a Mother's Day for peace. In other words, seeing the horrors of the Civil War, they wanted to do something to try to say, you know what, let's not do this again. And so her daughter, Anna Jarvis, and Ann Jarvis's daughter, launched the first Mother's Day celebration at this church in West Virginia. And she worked very, very hard trying to convince members of Congress to make it a national holiday.
Mm-hmm.
And so in Washington, they actually considered this on the floor of the US House of Representatives. And somebody wisecracked, yeah, well, if we do a Mother's Day, the next thing you know, we're going to have to do a mother-in-law's day. And where's that going to lead to? And so they laughed it off. And my assumption is that they went home and they told their wives, hey, you're not going to believe this funny joke we came up with in Congress. And after they got out of the hospital, they probably returned to Washington and realized the error of their ways. But the upshot of it is that in the meantime, the various states decided, yeah, that's a great idea. We're going to have this holiday, and it all rolled up into a holiday that Anna Jarvis, the founder of this, should have been very proud of. But some years later, and this would have been in the 1920s after women finally earned the right to vote, she campaigned to abolish the holiday, or to boycott the holiday, I should say, because she was upset that the Hallmark greeting card company and various candy makers were exploiting it for profit instead of its original purpose to be sort of a day to remember that peace is a good thing, and that moms are in favor of peace because they don't want to see their sons and daughters killed and more. And so she ended up actually being opposed to the very holiday that she created, which
I did not know any of that.
interesting bit of trivia, right?
That is very cool. I will add on the West Virginia theme, and you probably know this. West Virginia joined the Union as a state during the Civil War in 1863. It was originally part of Virginia, which made Virginia a very big state back in the day. And it was the mountaineer, the poorer mountain population in what was then very northern, northwestern Virginia, was not interested in a lot of the issues that the more plantation, agricultural slave owning population in Southern Virginia. They were very different regions, and West Virginia carved off and became a separate Union state during the Civil War in 1863. which is kind of ironic because like today it's like if not the most conservative state in the union, it's like second after Alabama, or something like that. I mean, it's changed. Things change, but
Things
back in
change.
back in 1863, yep, they were like, no, we would rather join the union in the South, so they split off. Yep, and my family's from there too.
Your family is from West Virginia.
My dad's father was a coal miner. My great grandfather was killed a union activist and organizer for the mine workers and died in a slate fall in a deep mine in 1947. I never met him.
Wow.
And yeah, he was tapping the ceiling, as they called it, with a new shaft to listen for air pockets and chalk where they would put up braces, wooden timber braces, and the roof caved in. Killed him and like 6 or 7 other guys,
Jeez.
including, actually not including someone who escaped was an uncle of mine, who died a long time ago. But he was young. He was like 13 or 14 at the time, and he escaped. And it was when that happened that my grandfather shortly after decided that the deep mines were not for him. The universe had told him to make a career change, and he became a strip miner, running heavy equipment, knocking the tops off mountains. And ironically, his daughter, my Aunt Brenda, became an employee later for the State Bureau of Land Reclamation, putting back together the mountains that like her father had torn apart between 1950 and 1970 or so.
So
The world goes
basically,
around in
yeah.
circles.
So basically, her dad set her up for a cool government job, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, she's the last of the family. She's still alive down in Fayetteville. So, yep. West Virginia is a strange place. It really is. Beautiful,
It's a
beautiful,
beautiful place, though.
physically beautiful state.
Yeah.
But yeah,
The geography is stunning.
it is absolutely. But
Plus,
there's
it's
all
got
these
Mothman.
it has Mothman, and it has all these teeny. I mean, every state has teeny little towns, but West Virginia's are way up in the hills. And the town where my dad spent most of his teenage years is a little bird called Beards Fork, which you can find on the map. But to get to it, you go up a dirt road off the county road through a couple of creeks, up past an old one-room schoolhouse and a cemetery. And when you get up there, the houses it's an old coal town around the abandoned tipple, and the houses are all on stilts on the side of the hills, and it's strange. It really is.
That country is very
disrespect, but
similar to southeastern Ohio in terms of geography and
Yep.
and all that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much. Yep.
And we have an author friend by the name of Jess Montgomery
We do.
who's written a series of books set in that era that we were
Yep.
just talking about, and in
That's right.
that general geography.
We should get Jess on the podcast. She does a podcast series herself to promote her own books, and as we see your books, Mr. Manners and the Strange Files in the back there, she does a similar podcast to this, and to promote her series of books that are set in, like I said, Southern Ohio. It's a female sheriff, based on a real life character who was like the first female sheriff in Ohio in the 1920s.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's plan on doing that.
Yeah.
And I've actually interviewed her. I've got an interview with her that I think is still floating around on YouTube somewhere. And it's fascinating. Her writing process is fascinating, and the research she did to develop, this world she created for her series of books is wonderful.
Right.
And I love her books.
Yeah, they are good books.
Yeah, they're really good books.
She actually heard about the sheriff. I will take a small piece of credit. She heard about the existence of the sheriff from an Ohio magazine story I wrote about the woman, 15 years ago probably. And she called me and she said, "Do you have? And can I borrow your notes from that story, because I want to use her as a fictional character?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And
she mentioned that to me. Yeah,
it's really cool.
Way to go.
She would be great to have on the podcast. She interviewed me
would.
after I retired for her podcast. Most of her podcasts are interview shows with other writers, editors, authors. And how the hell she ended up with me, I don't know, because I'm not neither of those anymore. But she and I worked together at the Dayton Daily News for a number of years. She wrote a column for me for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all right, dear listeners, you will meet Jess Montgomery on a future Sharpen Up podcast. I have a hard time
on time.
Tell us no. On time, I think we're good. Got a couple more minutes.
Okay.
And I wanted to mention the Cinco de Mayo is coming up
Right.
on May 5th, and you mentioned in the historical bit of your newsletter that it is the anniversary of Napoleon III losing the Battle of Puebla in 1862, May 5th, 1862, to Mexican troops. And the beauty of that whole thing is that, number one, most Americans probably have no idea that France ever owned and occupied Mexico, number one. Number two, France did. They did it very badly, and they actually moved into Mexico during the Civil War because they knew that we couldn't object to them being there because we were tied up, with all that. And number three, Americans will use almost any excuse to take another country's sort of holiday and turn it into an American drinking day. And that's what I love about America. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, well, that is
And I
that is one
don't
of the
remember Cinco de
interesting.
Mayo like in college or high school. This is like a fairly recent American drinking thing.
Yeah.
Did we celebrate Cinco de Mayo 30 years ago? I don't remember it. It
Well,
seems like a
yeah,
fairly
but it
recent.
depends on where you lived. I was in Texas at the time, and yes,
Okay.
Cinco de Mayo
Really?
is a big holiday. What's
Okay.
ironic is that it's not a big holiday in Mexico.
All
And
right.
so it's turned into this holiday to celebrate Mexican American culture, which is really cool.
Right.
But down in Mexico, they don't, it's just not that big a deal because the other part of, the rest of the story is that after this, outgunned, outmanned Mexican force basically kicked Napoleon's ass, a few days later, he came back and kicked their ass. So
Yep.
it was sort of a temporary victory. Although the thing that I take heart in is, given what's going on in Ukraine right now, where a
Yep.
small army of patriots is taking the world's largest nuclear power to task as it invades their own country. This is an example of how you can do it. You can
Right.
be outgunned, you can be outmanned, and you can still win. And Ukraine right now is showing us how it's done. And even as we speak, we don't know what the outcome of all of this is going to be. But wouldn't it be neat if it's someday, in addition to Cinco de Mayo, we celebrate the ultimate victory of Ukraine over Russia?
That would be, yeah, well, that would be cool. And as the Ukrainians have probably figured out, this takes time too. I mean, the
Right.
French were in Mexico for several years, and it was, I think, like around 1868 or so before the French actually decided to give it up. So they were there for a number of years, and yeah, I mean, if you're Mexican, you're like probably know this history a lot better than most Americans do because it's a fairly recent and a big deal. But yep.
Yep.
You're not supposed to take over somebody else's country. That's bad.
That's a bad thing,
Shouldn't do
although
that.
let's face it, I mean, America's hands aren't exactly clean on that front either.
We are not. That is true. That would be a whole separate podcast. Yeah, actually.
Right.
Yeah,
But
that's true.
that was then and this is now. And so no apologies for that, I guess. But still, I mean, a little humility might not be
Be
in order.
such a
Might be in
bad thing.
order there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Speaking of humble people, however, you are a DC guy, JC Bruce, and I am surprised and astounded that in your rundown of important May dates, you did not mention on this podcast one that is on your always inspirational Sharpen Up newsletter, and that is that the very first Batman comic was published on May 1st, 1939.
That's true. By artist Bob Kane and writer Bill Finger.
What I learned from that little tidbit in the newsletter was I thought Bob Kane was his own writer. I did not know that he had another writer. I knew he was the artist and the creator, but I did not know about Bill Finger. So
I did not either. That's one of the fun things about writing this newsletter is, you have something like that, and then you just dig into it a little bit, and you discover all these interesting little bits and pieces that
right.
weren't always there. So a cool thing about that is in 2020, 2 years ago, a copy of that very first comic book that very first Batman comic book. It was in Detective Comics,
Yep.
uh, sold at auction for, drum roll, $1.5 million.
Wow. Not bad. Not bad. Now,
Not bad.
again, always trying to drive audio viewers of this podcast to the video version so they can see just exactly how good looking we are. I want to mention that in the background of your very busy office setting behind you, anyone who watched would know you're a DC guy because there is, I believe, I can see the Flash, a poster of Superman. I see the Green Lantern back there. I don't think I see Batman. Are you much of a Batman guy?
Now, Batman's standing right in front of Wonder Woman.
Oh, oh, okay, yeah. I do see. Okay, I'm sorry. It's in the background. Yeah. And
Yep.
which version is that? That's one of the movie posters. Which version is that?
I think that is Batman Begins.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Have you seen the new movie yet?
I have.
How
You
is
know
it?
what?
I hear it's quite good.
It's quite good and quite long. It's about a 3-hour movie, if I recall correctly, and it is very different from any of the other Batman movies. I don't want to say it's the best Batman movie because I think Batman Begins is, and that whole trilogy is probably the standard against which all of these superhero movies have to be measured. Right. But I would say the Batman, what it is really is it a fascinating detective story. Mm-hmm. It is a really good detective story, and the protagonist happens to be Batman. That's so cool. It's like Batman's very first stuff that he ever did before he developed, all of the fancy gear and but it is a very, very human story. That's cool. It's kind of funny because if it wasn't for the guy running around, in a cape and dressed like a bat, and if his girlfriend wasn't this, woman dressed like a cat, which, can be a little off-putting for people that, are sort of like reality based. There is a little suspension of disbelief that has to go on here to make all this work. But if it weren't for that, and you just made them like real people, they didn't have to, I think that it would be recognized as a truly terrific story.
Well, it got good reviews, and my son saw it and called me that day and raved about it. Because honestly, he over the years I've kind of soured on superhero movies because there's so many of them, and I am long since have lost track of the Marvel universe. I just can't even. I don't know. I don't get it. I don't understand. And also too, I kind of felt like I didn't need to always see the origin story redone. Okay, Peter Parker got bitten by a spider. Get over it. He's Spider-Man. Just start the movie in the middle. He's already Spider-Man. I don't need to see the whole thing. I don't need to see his uncle killed again. I've seen that 4 times.
Yeah.
And I guess this new one kind of just does that. It plops you down in the middle. The Batman's already Batman, and you don't need to see Bruce Wayne's mom and dad gunned down in the alley again.
Although it's still an integral part of the story. Here's the thing, that in like Iron Man or any of these superhero movies, in my opinion, the best story is the origin story, and I think that's why they end up going back to it. Yeah, because it's the most interesting thing. I mean, Batman is this really sort of tragic character, right? I mean, he's been twisted by this this childhood abomination that occurred to his family, and it's twisted him into become this kind of vigilante. And progressively the movies about him make him darker and darker, which I think is probably, if someone were to run around dressed up in an odd costume seeking revenge for the death of his parents, it would be pretty grim, pretty dark.
Sure. Yeah. And appropriately so, yeah. But all right, well, I will see it. I will say there is a guy in Dayton. There's a guy in Kettering, like in like a half a mile from where I'm sitting right now in my studio, who does dress as Batman and walks around Kettering waving at cars. I saw him last time we had a warm spell, because we're back to spring sweater weather in Ohio. I'm going to say about 3 weeks ago, I was leaving the studio, I think after one of our podcast sessions, and there he was, just waving at cars with a full Batman suit. And I'm like, okay, dude.
It could be a Dayton thing. Remember when Mike Peters, the Pulitzer Prize winning
Oh, yeah.
cartoonist for the Dayton Daily News,
Right. Good guy.
used to dress up as Superman all the time. I remember him regaling us with a story once about how he actually, the old Dayton Daily News building had Governor Cox's old library, and there's a big long conference table there where the news meetings took place. And if I recall Mike's story right, I mean, one day he somehow figured out a way to climb in through the window in the middle of a meeting or something. It's like this guy
which was not a safe thing to do.
Not a safe thing to do, but then again, he's Superman. So there must be something in the water in Dayton. People, who knows?
Who knows? I will only say that if that is true, as we close out, I will say that there is also a guy down near, just south of downtown, near the Marriott and University of Dayton, who occasionally is seen an Elvis on roller skates. He skates up and down the sidewalks along Main and Stewart and along the river, and he's an older guy, full giant black pomp, and the Elvis outfit. He's in the fat Elvis phase, but he's actually a fairly skinny guy, which kind of is a cognitive dissonance. And I doubt that Elvis was ever able to roller skate. This guy is a roller skating, skinny old Elvis, and people love him. He's actually out fairly often. I've seen him several times. I don't know who he is other than Elvis, but
okay. So your mission, Ron, is to track this guy down, and we're going to interview him here on the Sharpen Up podcast because the world demands to know who this guy is.
I'll do my best.
I mean, for all you know, it is Elvis.
Well, I once wrote a column on back when I was doing working for you, writing arts columns. I did write on the anniversary of Elvis's death. One year, I did write a column in which I imagined that I had found him working in the change booth at a laundromat in Duluth, and interviewed him. And he was kind of well, he was concerned that I would give away his location, and I swore that I would not. But then I did, and I never heard back from him. But it was a good interview. Yeah, he was going to be. He was mostly on the QT. He figured Duluth was as far from Memphis as he could go, and not be figured out. But it was unmistakably him. Yeah.
Okay, I think with that we're going to close it down.
All right. Gosh, well, because we're all about real news.
That's right. That's right. At the Sharpen Up podcast, we are about truth telling.
Yeah, he might be dead now, because this was 20 years ago when I wrote that. Yeah, and we've not been in close touch.
How old would Elvis be right now?
I don't know. I will find out for the next podcast.
Oh, good. Keep us in suspense. That's good. All right, that's how we'll start off.
I will check the interwebbies and let our listening audience know. And since there has been a Civil War theme as well, I will remind you of a famous quote by that great American president, Abraham Lincoln, that you can't always trust everything you read on the internet. Good night, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron. See you later.
You're welcome. All right, see you later.